my name is Samir Ali and welcome to The Wide Angle, a programme where we discuss classic and contemporary films and the issues that they raise. Today we're looking at two British films to discuss the war on terror and comedy, or more specifically, satire. They are Four Lions by director Chris Morris, released in 2010, and In the Loop by Armando Iannucci, released in 2009. We are delighted to have three guest experts here today to discuss these films with us. They are Phil Hammond, Professor of Media and Communications at London South Bank University and editor of Screens of Terror. Tom Slater, film critic for the online news magazine Spiked, and film buff Joe Cohen, who is a politics student at SOAS University and a Battle of Ideas committee member. So to kick things off, let's have a quick reminder of these films by watching a few clips.
Well, bollocks on my liability. I am the invisible jihadi. They seek him here, they seek him there, but he's not there. He's blowing up your slag sister.
Big enough for you now, buddy? Am I blowing a dog in a ditch? Or am I Packy Rambo?
You see that over there? That's a sex shop, right? The US Embassy or some other such slag utility. When I say you fly to the target, when I dial this, you go to heaven, Brother Crow. Inshallah.
We need to have a conversation about the mood of the British Parliament.
No offense, son, but I mean, you look like you should still be at school with your head down a fucking toilet.
Your first point there, the offense, I'm afraid I'm going to have to take it.
We burnt this tight-ass city to the ground in 1814, and I'm all for doing it again. Starting with you fat fuck.
Mr. Simon Foster in that regard.
Yes, I think that Mr. Foster would have something to say to that.
Yeah.
I'm certainly hearing both sides. In England, we have a saying for very situations such as this, which is that it's difficult, lemon difficult.
Maybe we should start by considering how effective these two films are in sending up contemporary trends.
Well, what I think is really interesting about Four Lions, considering the Birmingham bomb trials that have just happened in February 2013, what's interesting is how ridiculous those three men were, trading away their money on the foreign exchange, making stupid mistakes. I think the film Four Lions really brings out how ludicrous some of these terror plots are.
One of the interesting things that struck me about the coverage of the 2013 Birmingham bombers is that not only did every media report compare them to the characters in Four Lions, but they even compared themselves to the characters in Four Lions. They knew that they, in a vague way, that they were going to look slightly sort of ridiculous. What I kind of wonder about that is how effective the sort of satire is in sending up the pretensions of would-be suicide bombers in a way that actually makes them look ridiculous to wider society. So when you read the media reports of the recent trial, what you see is journalists kind of not, it seems to me, not sure how to kind of read the story. On the one hand, they're saying this looks silly, this looks ridiculous, they're so incompetent, they lost all their money, they couldn't make a bomb, you know, they didn't know what they were doing. On the other hand, they're also treating it still quite seriously as this was a major threat and it was going to maybe be another 9/11. So there's still a certain kind of schizophrenic attitude there, not sure quite how to take things like this.
I completely agree with you, and I think what's really interesting about how Four Lions makes people uncomfortable is the fact that we're not used to seeing the war on terror as being perpetrated by normal people. We're so used to thinking of terrorists as evil geniuses.
Why is it that comedies are able to make such insights into the war on terror where serious films have not been able to do that?
Yeah, maybe it's to do with the genre of comedy. I sort of think that what's interesting about these films is the way that, unlike sort of straight films about the war on terror, films that are trying to take often a critical perspective on it, these kind of comedic treatments of it, somehow get the essential truth that we're no longer in the same kind of political universe that we used to be in. So there's more kind of straight treatments are trying often to have some critical purchase on it, but they don't, because they miss what's different. That they're looking for sort of hidden motivations and conspiracies behind the drive to war, whereas In the Loop understands there is no real kind of political substance to it. That it's these kind of politicians without much in the way of kind of firm convictions or political beliefs who are kind of trying to put on a good PR war show. It kind of gets that truth much better than other war on terror films. And one of the reasons why Four Lions, I think, is so brilliant is that it understands that those motivations are very, very superficial. It's a kind of generalised, quite incoherent dislike of contemporary Western society. It's a sort of pose to represent yourself as somehow, kind of making solidarity with people who are oppressed. These people are not themselves generally experiencing any kind of oppression or marginalisation, except to the extent that they're often sort of socially marginal, find it hard to fit in. But what's great about the film is that it gets that, it gets the kind of political emptiness of contemporary terrorism, just as In the Loop does with mainstream politics.
Judy's lubricated horsecock aside for a second, are you saying I'm now no longer allowed to make media appearances?
Correct.
I think one thing that the comedy form offers a kind of exploration of the war on terror is that because from the beginning it was presented very much in terms of certain binary oppositions, so it was either good versus evil, or the flip side in terms of a lot of liberal commentary on it was that it's neo-imperialist versus oppressed people who are fighting back for certain grievances that they've kind of developed as a collective over the years, whether it be over Palestine or later on the invasion of Afghanistan. And I think what both films do very well is show the absurdity of both sides. There's this great story that Chris Morris talks about saying the first moment he realised he could make a comedy out of terrorism was reading about a group of Yemeni jihadis who on Millennium Eve were planning to blow up a warship, and they loaded all of their explosives into a boat and then it sank. And just the idea of these four men then stood on the dock looking as their explosives just slowly sink into the water, instantly realised that contrary to the media coverage, this idea of them being this very well connected, very organised group who had a very coherent ideology and were looking to inflict themselves on the West could be foolish, and I think that's something, being able to see the foolishness on both sides is what is key to really getting to the reality of it.
We'll put the bleach on boil.
Right.
We have instructions to bring havoc to this bullshit, consumerist, godless, packy bashing, Gordon Ramsay, taste the different specialty cheddar, torture endorsing, massacre sponsoring, look at me dancing, piss with me knob out, Sky One uncovered, who gives a fuck about dead Afghanis Disneyland?
Following on from that, what I really liked about Four Lions was that Chris Morris didn't skirt around the edges. He actually got to the core of it. If you look at the basic plot of the film, 4 British Asian sort of extremists going down to London to commit a terror attack is really close to home. And in fact, one of the fathers of the 7/7 victims came out shortly after the film was released and said that was far too close to home and wasn't happy with the film being shown. But in a sad sort of way, I think it's the only way that we can actually take a look at this. And equally, the politicians in the Loop have no clear political objective. But I would sort of say that In the Loop, in that regard, is more unrealistic. I think that politicians do have political convictions, and this was something that was confirmed by Alistair Campbell when he was made to watch In the Loop, and he found that the most unrealistic aspect of the film was that politicians are portrayed as purely self-interested, just about self-preservation and trying to create their image, when really, I don't think you get into politics unless you have real political convictions.
The treatment of politics in the film and political conviction in the Loop is not quite as black and white as that, because they take American politics still quite seriously. That's like the kind of grown-up, serious politics, and it's the Brits specifically who are seen as kind of all over the place and not really knowing what they're doing, except furnishing their own sort of image. The particular character is a very nice satire of Claire Short and her kind of umming and ahhing over whether to resign over the Iraq War.
This job is incredibly stressful, you know that.
Simon, you're not a lion tamer. You're not a snooker player.
I don't want to back a war, Judy. Look, put some hints out there, put some nods and some winks out that I'm toying with resignation, OK? See if the PM reacts.
You want me to put out some winks?
You're right that it is a bit too anti-political, but on the other hand, it does capture something, I think, quite true about politics in recent years, which is the kind of collapse of those old left-right traditions and the rise of a kind of a political class who are very much oriented not so much towards representing the electorate as towards the media and performing well for the media. And they capture that very well, and I think that there is, you know, so say the Blair administration, right, so Tony Blair I'm sure does have very firm beliefs, and he really is a true believer in his brand of muscular humanitarian military intervention. I'm sure he really means it. I don't think he's putting it on. On the other hand, the Blair government really did kind of typify that sort of government by soundbite and government by focus group, and a kind of reliance on polls and opinion, public opinion, and looking to what the editorials and newspapers are saying in order to then formulate how they should conduct themselves and what might be the right kind of policy angles to push. So I think it does capture something that I think is real, even though you're right to say there's some limitations.
And on the topic of soundbites, I see that obviously in the Loop there's this clear idea that the politicians manipulate the media, and that is what you're told throughout the film, that the central character, Malcolm Tucker, tells the papers what to write. And even at the end when he leaks the story, he's intentionally leaking the story and he's stringing the media along. Now, I would believe that the media themselves have a vested interest in themselves. As Alistair Campbell said in that same interview, he said that the media are all about self-aggrandisement just as much as politicians are. So there seems to be this interesting dichotomy where you don't really know, is it the media that controls the politicians, or do the politicians have the upper hand in the struggle? You know, I'm not too certain that it is as black and white that the politicians always have it their own way.
I think there is a sort of a symbiotic relationship between the media and the politicians, in that they use each other to boost their own careers. But what gets lost, as you were saying, is the purpose, ideology. That just completely gets lost, and suddenly we just have people, career-focused politicians. Their policy initiatives aren't based on conviction.
Specifically in The Loop, though, I thought one of the things they did quite well, they showed the kind of opportunism of the way that politicians reacted in the war and kind of the run-up to the Iraq War. So again, if you look at straight films, the way they treat it as a kind of ultra-serious conspiracy, a kind of malevolent, worked-out plan, and I think that's further away from the truth than the kind of thing we see in The Loop. And the other thing that they did well in the film was that they show the gap between the international stage and domestic politics. So at one point he goes back, doesn't he, to his constituency. Yeah, you see it's just like a kind of awful wasteland of these tiny little problems that he doesn't want to have anything to do with. He'd much rather be in Washington, you know, kind of lauding it. And I think that too captures something about the way that politicians tend to operate nowadays. They're looking for ways to project that kind of positive image. Having some kind of real connection to a constituency is somehow much less attractive.
Your wall is falling into my mother's garden. She tried to call the office, but she was fobbed off. Fobbed off by your people. She's not Lord Snooty in a posh car or Madonna on a horse.
Well, I find that sort of thing incredibly irritating myself.
It's a patch from London. It's Karen Clark.
Right.
Urgent.
Hello.
I mean, satire, whether it's in literature or cinema or whatever, quite often comes from a place of general misanthropy a lot of the time, general cynicism. This person's an idiot, but also this person's an idiot. They're both bastards. They're both horrible people. I mean, it just kind of presents you with that as a situation from which you can then respond to. And I think so you can almost forgive In the Loop in a sense of being so relentlessly cynical. Having said that, in comparison to Four Lions, there's more space for ambivalence for people who aren't sure about what they're doing. There's more space as well for saying your image of what a jihadi must be like is completely different. Not only that, they can be westernised, they can also be conflicted. So whilst saying that satire can be geared towards being slightly more cynical, relentless, as well as misanthropic, I think Four Lions manages to pull out a little bit more hope because of how much more humanising it is. It's not reducing people to these sort of caricatures, I suppose.
I actually think In the Loop is a very realistic portrayal. Alistair Campbell might not have thought so, but, you know, screw him. the differed position that Simon Foster in The Loop is head of, was Andrew Mitchell's position. And also, when they're cutting and pasting the document, or when anything to do with the document, Malcolm Tucker starts talking about, this Iceman source, really credible, really reliable, which is a lot like there's a guy called Curveball who Colin Powell wheeled out from like Blair's dodgy dossier, this one source that ended up getting used quite a lot. And I think what's really realistic in those portrayals is that not necessarily the kind of opportunism as we've talked about a bit earlier, but in the sense that one's political connections are kind of, what you make of them, and everyone sort of hates each other a bit in both Four Lions and in The Loop. I really don't get the impression that the characters really like each other very much. All of the politics that one imagines goes on in the back halls of, the UN General Assembly, that actually make, those kind of portrayals quite convincing and quite realistic and actually quite powerful. And so I think this problem where we can struggle to say whether or not we think that kind of political cynicism is valuable or not, is we should at least take the recognition that in some way it is expressing something about the nature of our political connections that no one's found a serious way of making yet. Four Lions is the perfect antidote to war films that display a solidarity amongst fighting brothers. Barry hates Omar and they really don't get on, and Faisal's a bit weird, and Hassan Malik's got a massive chip on his shoulder and just wants to film everything all the time and sing along to Dancing in the Moonlight. It's quite it's quite uplifting in its tragedy.
Cut the top paragraph and paste it into page 5.
Right, yeah, we've done it. Go to page 9.
Highlight from that page right to the end of the document.
Go on, do it.
The caveats. Right, okay. Delete.
Right, okay, we're doing it. Delete it.
You can't delete the arguments against the war.
Oh, there's a little shake of the head here, Mark. I think he's crashed.
Just give him a thump. That usually works.
Let me just try a wee bit of manual override. Let's see if it is possible to delete the arguments against the war. Hey, you could delete it after all. It's done.
Four Lions also shows is a kind of narcissism in a way, because I look at those guys, right, of course they've got these really depraved intentions and ideas about what they want to do, which, they are terrorists, but in a way they're much closer to when you get people saying, I want to be famous. Kind of look at them and go, well, yeah, but what do you like? Do you like singing? Do you like acting? You know what I mean? It's weird. You don't say, I want to be a singer or an actor. You say, I want to be famous and I want to be a celebrity. And I think you get a sense of that kind of narcissism in the Four Lions and the Four Guys.
I think in the chapter of your book, Phil, you make a really good point, which is sort of drawing a correlation between the character of Wadge from Four Lions and Simon Foster from In the Loop, where Simon Foster is sort of left alone in the faith room with his thoughts, and he responds to say, I don't have any thoughts. And, in the same vein, Wadge is asked, what are your demands? And he says, I don't have any demands. And is it just the case that terrorists and politicians alike don't really have any political conviction? It's all just a search for status and self-aggrandizement. I think that's definitely a common message between these two films, and I think it's something that's quite accurate.
I think I would not put it in quite such personal terms. I think that there is a narcissism about politics and a narcissism about contemporary terrorism in the way that they operate, which doesn't necessarily mean that the individuals involved are narcissistic and they're just only think about themselves and nothing else. There has been, I think, over the last sort of 25 years or so, a kind of sense of wanting to reconstitute a sense of mission and purpose, of wondering where that could come from, and looking often to war and intervention as the arena in which that could be made to happen. So first it was humanitarian military intervention, and then it was war on terror, and then it went kind of back in a way to more humanitarianism. That seems to be the arena in which politicians look to reconstitute that sense of mission. I think you can see something a bit similar, in the way that contemporary terrorism operates. So what you were saying, Sam, about the narcissism of it, you know, making those martyrdom videos of these Birmingham guys, they'd all make their videos, haven't they? That's about the only thing, in fact, they did accomplish. They couldn't make the bomb, because they lost almost all the money, but they got the videos made. And it is that sense of wanting to kind of make a statement, show that you stand for something, but there's something that they're trying to stand for. It's very vague, very ill thought out. There isn't anything of substance there. It ends up being a kind of, one of them said, we want to get revenge for everything. You know.
Wadge, what are your demands?
I don't have any.
I'll just leave you to your thoughts.
I haven't got any thoughts. I'm just staring vacantly into space while a distant voice in the back of my head goes, oh shit.
I'm in a kebab shop. I got hostages and everything, like Xbox Counter-Strike.
Right, listen, Wadge. You
Thing is, they're all brothers. I still get points for taking them with me, though, yeah? Like Nectar Card.
Looking at Four Lions, one thing that I would have liked to have seen from the film is a representation of true Islam. You see that the four bombers, they're not very Islamic in the way that they act. They don't have a good concept of what true Islam entails. The one representation of Islam that you do get, the only religious person in the film, is Omar's brother. And I think he's portrayed in a very weak way, in a way to say that it's all about pacifism and he's trying to stop his brother from committing this horrendous act. And he comes across looking rather timid and tame. And I think that it would have been nice to include some real discussion as to how wrong sort of the motives and sort of objectives of the four bombs was from a Muslim perspective. So I think they could have strengthened the character of Omar's brother a little and made him a bit more sort of weighty in that regard.
You know, Omar's religious tradition is an identity of you know, someone who's going to make gestures and stand up against things and be empathetic to, you know, his cousin who died defending a mosque. His political ideas, his identity completely shape how he uses his religion. Whereas, you know, the true believer, I'm not so comfortable with the term, you know, real Islam, but we could say, you know, the sincere believer, the sincerer believer is shown in just as cynical a light as everyone else. Actually, I think that portrayal was quite worrying.
Is it me? Not in this house, bro.
Frida, bro, you got some.
Alright, go easy. Okay. Yeah, come on. I told my you got 30 seconds.
What are you teaching him, Omar?
Bro, it's a water pistol. Have you lost it? Have you got 150 quotes from scholars saying that we can't squat a water pistol?
Omar, there is no justification for what you are planning.
What am I planning, bro?
You tell me.
You wanna know what I'm planning?
Yeah.
Allah, thinking I'm gonna go upstairs and run a hot bath. Right, no, listen. Come back down, make beans on toast. Proper hungry.
Very funny.
What?
ये जो तुम मजाक कर रहे हो ना, ये तुम्हारी कमजोरी की निशानी है.
Is it, bro? Have you got opinions to back that up?
I've got 18 opinions, all very good ones.
You know what? It's not top trumps. Muslims are out there getting pasted and you're sitting there going, I've got 60,000 opinions saying we can't fight back, we have to measure our dahi with a ruler and lock our wives in cupboard.
I look at Four Lions and I don't think it was an argument for, you know, sort of redeeming Islam. I think it was a film about the war on terror. It wasn't a commentary on the portrayal of Muslims. It was about the war on terror, and I think it's just a bit pointless to, in a way, look for that in Four Lions in the first place. I think what it does nicely with Omar's brother is to show the absurdity of how the war on terror is perceived in the first place as this big, bad fear, you know, and you can see it in the sort of sentencing of the Birmingham Four. Now, while I would say that they should be shown some kind of punishment for what they did go and train in Pakistan in a terrorist camp. You know, they did have, even though they weren't able to make bombs that might have worked or something, they did have bomb-making equipment. I would say that the tragedy of the whole sentencing process is it reflects no sense of perspective. It's just about this big bad fear of these alien ideas. I think what Four Lions does very, very well in the portrayal of Omar and the others is show that, you know, these guys, they're quite normal lads. All the cultural references in there are ones that me and you recognise, Rubber Dinghy Rapids and all these other things, you know. And then you look at the degraded ideas and things that they want to do, and what's really shocking and chilling is that actually all of this nihilism comes from the West. It's got nothing to do with what they're thinking about or talking about in Afghanistan, or it's got nothing to do with fundamentalist Islam or anything like that. Actually, it's a rejection of modernity. You know, that whole thing about I can't remember how he says it, but the church of capitalism, that is McDonald's, rejection of consumerism and various, the slags and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I think that's much more what the film is about, rather than making some kind of very weak multicultural sort of argument for let's redeem Islam.
I think I'm really glad they didn't do that, because that would just have been so cheesy.
Today is an opportunity for you to look in the mirror at your Western imperialist culture. Superficial materialism ends at the capitalist church of McDonald's. Right, Matt is running the London Marathon tomorrow. He's doing it in costume. Right, you know they're doing it in costume. Right, well, so can we. We can disguise the gear in there, and it's perfect. We've got live TV, prime targets all along the route.
We've got a target, Omar. It's the mosque.
Right, when you meet God, do you want to tell him I struck a blow for the brothers, right? Or that I blew a load of them up?
Blew a load of them up. He'll love that. He'll get it.
I swear, Qasam, bro. I may ask you to blow yourself up, but I will never ask you to piss in your own mouth. Rubber Diggy Rapids.
If anything, they're so alienated from the community that they say that they're representing it to such an extent that Barry contemplates bombing the mosque as a way of kind of forwarding his vision, because, as Sal was saying, the terms of their revolt and the terms of their dissatisfaction are really dictated by Western prejudices, things that very shallow distaste of consumerism, and yet they're so entrenched in it because of the cultural references they say. I mean, all the things that Omar uses to try and explain to Waj why he should be doing what he's doing just clang with that same sort of consumerist banality that they're claiming to be against in a weird sort of way. And also, I think something that is very subtly done, but quite interestingly, is the general sense of isolation that they have, and the complete lack of community that you see at all. I mean, there is this very lonely thread through Four Lions. There's never anyone else around. All of their meetings are kind of conducted in like mid-afternoon on a grey day when no one's really about. They completely isolated themselves, not only from mainstream society, but even from the Muslim community. They're completely alienated, and I think that puts very subtle and interesting ideas in there about a general sense of alienation and a lack of a kind of common forum in some sort of way.
I also just want to challenge this idea for a second, maybe it's controversial, that there is no Islamic root to terrorism, because all of the terrorists are Muslims.
But you have to take the religion of Islam and completely butcher it and pick and choose what
of
you
course,
completely want to
but
believe in.
There must be something in the actual scripture that they're
terrorism.
using to justify.
And I think the point that Tom made about them being completely cut off from the community, I think they could have made more of that in Four Lions, perhaps by showing them in contrast to the community. And ultimately, if we accept that there was no serious discussion there between what these guys were doing and, as I said, real Islam, which seems to be a popular phrase, then we have to say that satire can only ever go so far, and it can't actually provide any real discussion points or take anything in any serious way. Because if you're even going to satirise the one character that's supposed to stand up for something quite serious, then ultimately you're left with everybody coming out with equal amounts of shit.
All of this terrorism has very little to do with Islam as a religion or whatever, and is just very much rooted in disillusionments that we as a society have in the West in terms of, Tom talking about consumerism. I mean, the thing about the Church of Capitalism that Omar says, just think of Occupy in your head. I know that's kind of a fact that happens afterwards.
In response to what you said, Tom, about the marginal status of these characters, which I think is right, except for Omar, who is kind of like a mystery at the centre of this film, isn't he? Because he's the person that is quite together, and he is quite articulate, and he is very kind of likeable, and he's got a job, and he's got a family, and he does seem to be of the various conspirators the most kind of normal one of them, and it's very hard, I think, to understand his kind of motivations and what it is that's driving him, and it's harder to understand it because you have to really kind of confront what you were saying, that kind of the kind of emptiness in Western culture. It's a very hard thing to face up to. The others, you can say, oh well, they're idiots. They're kind of marginal characters. They're misfits, and of course they don't. They do these stupid things. Omar is more like someone you might know. He's like someone you might be friends with.
Mm-hmm.
And it's much harder to understand that, I think. And if you look at the way that, I mean, we talked a bit about the way that this film, Four Lions, satirises official misunderstandings of terrorism, and they kind of think it's something to do with fundamentalist Islam. It kind of pokes fun at that misunderstanding. On the other hand, you could say that the official understanding has caught up a bit. You know, since the immediate aftermath of 9/11, when there was this idea that Al-Qaeda was a kind of something like Smirch in the James Bond films, you know, it's like this kind of super organisation that's very, very powerful. Well, gradually that has given way to a more realistic idea that actually, yes, it's more like a kind of brand name, or it's an idea. So now there is this idea that the way to combat terrorism, the way to combat extremist ideas, is through values and through narrative. They say we've got to challenge the terrorist narrative, we've got to challenge get people to appreciate our shared values and things like that. Well, that's the kind of hollow centre, isn't it, of Western politics and Western society. And that's why I think Omar's such an interesting character, because he's someone who's seen as very much part of mainstream society and clearly doesn't feel inspired, like doesn't buy into it. And that's, you know, that's a kind of challenging thing I think the film kind of wants to make us look at.
It's no secret that there is a real vacuum of sort of common social ground in Western society. But I think that for somebody to take on the idea that there needs to be a violent reaction to this, that it needs to be brought down, it needs to be something really deeper driving that there. And you don't really see that in Omar. That's strange. There's not really much of a violent streak in him, other than the fact that he wants to blow people up. And none of his interactions with his family or anybody else that he meets with suggests that he wants to actually cause harm to people. It's just that he has this in his head, stuck in his head, that that's what he needs to do, and it's very, very strange.
I mean, that's a kind of scary thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, it sounds quite similar to the way that, you know, often young people are approaching politics. It's like a kind of purity. You know, you would bring an innocence to the kind of political discussions you'd be having, that inclusion and that the kind of political motivation that interaction should be valued, just kind of self-expression is really overemphasized in you know, a lot of citizenship education, and in the way that young people are treated in a lot of, you know, political discussion more generally, whereas, you know, the kind of politics of the head, the more calculating, more thinking agenda is much maligned in exactly the way that you kind of see in The Loop. Is very much a politics of the head. Malcolm Tucker does it seems to be really smart. His witty tongue is just the tip of his iceberg of, you know, obviously a lot of processes that are going on in the background that he's completely happy, the most comfortable character, to change the meetings back and forth, or to change which political connections he should be making at the time. You know, he advocates a kind of politics of the head that in The Loop seeks to criticise, where actually in Four Lions is being valorised.
And I need you to speed things up.
Okay, speed what up, Malcolm?
The debate.
Right.
I need you to bring it from 1:30 p.m. to 11 a.m.
Right, let me tell you how the process works here, Malcolm, and why that's not possible.
Just fucking do it, otherwise you'll find yourself in the Caucasus, right? In a medieval fucking war zone, with your arse in the air, trying to persuade a bunch of men in balaclavas that sustained sexual violence is not the fucking way forward.
Don't listen to your brain, bro. Okay? The Shagani gets in there with his wassa-wassa. Right? But what you got to do, you got to listen to your heart. Remember?
My heart, yeah, brother Omar.
So what's your heart say?
It says, it's wrong, Waj, don't do it.
So he should listen to his brain.
No. He's got to listen to his heart, Barry.
You look at Blair, the kind of conviction, in one way, yes, he's a conviction politician, but it's all about his own personal conscience. Yeah. So when he was going to war in Kosovo, he said, it's the right thing to do. I just know, I feel it's the right thing to do. And then when in the case of Iraq, well, history will be my judge. You know, not the electorate will be my judge, but the history, they'll know that I did the right thing. My conscience tells me this is what I have to do. So it comes down to a kind of personal statement about yourself. That's that kind of narcissistic aspect of politics again. But in a way, the anti-war voice in reality was a little bit like that too, wasn't it? The Not In My Name protests were sort of just the flip side version of that. Well, your conscience tells you that's what you should be doing. My conscience tells me I don't want to have anything to do with that. You know, this is my kind of image of the kind of morally correct person who doesn't support what you're doing over there. And there's a kind of complete failure of political engagement and no kind of systematised, maybe thought through in that more intellectual way that John was talking about, sort of system of political beliefs. It's all about saying something about, in a quite narcissistic way, about yourself and what you ethically think is the right thing to do.
Well, that's all we have time for today, but we'll hope you continue this debate in the comments section below or on Facebook, Twitter or your preferred social media website. We'd like to thank our special guests for joining us in the debate today, and if you'd like to take part in the next Wide Angle, then please email us.